Yes, so it's a pleasure to be here today. And as Prof. Jacob said, I'll be presenting on African Americans, doing missions. Okay, and I'm a PhD student at Fuller and PhD candidate. Recently, I passed my qualification exams, and now I'm working on my dissertation. So if there are any other questions, you can ask me during our discussion. And I'll go ahead now and share with you what I have prepared. Prof, could you go to the next page? Thank you. So this is the roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. So I just did the introduction of who I am. And then we're going to talk about what is mission. I'm sure you actually discuss this mission or missions, whether we use singular or plural. And then I'm going to talk about the World Missionary Conference that happened in Edinburgh in 1910. And then Africa here, I'm going to talk about the diaspora and the continent, okay? And then examples of Black missionaries from Central, Black missionaries so African-American missionaries that went to Central Africa, specifically Congo and West Africa, Nigeria, and then South Africa. And then and that'll be the conclusion, and hopefully we'll have a fruitful discussion together. Okay, so what is mission? I'm sure you by now you know what mission is or missions. It's different denominations define mission or missions in various ways. Okay, for some it's about sending over there overseas. For others, it's more specific within the church. For example, I often give this example with the Orthodox Church. Be it Ethiopian Orthodox Church or Eastern Orthodox Church, the emphasis is often within. Okay, so the understanding is that we're going to do mission. It's not just about going there. For them, is that we have to win even our souls, so we live better with each other within the four walls of this church. After we do this, then we can go out into the world. And into the world would mean with our neighbors in the same country or overseas. But for them, they emphasize a lot of inside jobs, so to speak. While, for example, in the Protestant denomination, more specifically, I can say within the Methodist Church, it's making disciples, and then you make disciples. And then the purpose of making disciples, being Christian, is for them is you can go outside into the world and evangelize the world. And others, the emphasis is actually about more so about winning souls, right? For example, the Pentecostal church, means using this in general terms, okay? Because Pentecostalism is large, but the emphasis of winning souls is very important to them. I suppose for them that's part of their mission, okay? So there are various ways that mission is being defined based on denomination and even some regions. So going out there or going out there, when I mean by out there, I'm talking about overseas. And then others have the emphasis is more local, doing those local missionary work. So that is where we are. That's the general, and there's general ways in which Christians define missions. And in fact, there's a great book. I don't know whether, Prof, you discussed this. It's by Bevins, if I remember right. It's about discussing a mission, whether mission is even biblical. So there's some scholars who argue that mission is not biblical because that word has been very problematic, and it's been used in some cases, especially by missionaries who have gone overseas and caused a lot of damage, which part of that damage actually I'm going to be highlighting here for them, for Bevins, and is that mission has been abused. So for him, that because that word has been very abused, or even prior to the Leopold, which I'm going to discuss in this presentation, for him is that from very beginning, mission has been very messy. So scholars are, people interpret it differently, and the cases where atrocities were committed because of mission. So for him, it should be abandoned, and something new ought to be constructed so that we will be able to use a different language on what Christians do, as opposed to using the word mission or missions. Okay, so the next one is, Prof, can you go to the next? Perfect. So I'm going to just give you real quick, just a brief, just to give you a context. Okay, so Christianity arrived in Africa when I say Christianity, I'm talking about the Eurocentric version of Christianity, because Christianity has been in Africa since its inception. So we can go back as far as the 4th century. But the Christianity that is very popular in Africa today has been the Christianity that Europeans have they've taken to the continent. Okay, Europeans and Africans, so people of African descent. So this Christianity it starts in the 16th century, so 1500, as you can see in the slides, and then so because we're bringing it to the U.S. context, right? So enslaved Africans came to the United States. We're brought to the United States in 1619, as you can see on the slide. And then we have the Scramble for Africa. This is 1884 to 1885. So this is a period where Europeans wanted to take pieces of Africa, because at this time they've discovered that there are many resources in Africa, natural resources that could make them rich, to make it plain. So they divided. They had a conference called the Berlin Conference, where they had this conference that we're going to divide Africa based on what our interest, based on our interest. So they divided and pretty much gave each other portions of Africa. Hence the reason why today we have Africans, for example, that speak English. And then so we have Anglophone Africa, or we have Francophone Africa. Okay. So this is because of this history, this colonial history. And then we have here so here in the United States, moving to the United States, we have the Civil War, and we have slavery, we have Reconstruction, the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, and then right after that we have the Jim Crow laws. These are laws that were put in place to minimize Black people's ability to maneuver and thrive as human beings. So we have the Board of Education, so Brown versus Board of Education. Okay, so this is where to end the segregation laws. Then we have the Civil Rights Acts. Okay, then that was passed in 1965, and then do it in the 1968. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and then we're now here. I give you this map, this historical map for a purpose. This is to show you the things that enslaved Africans were going through. So there were stages. They were going through stages of marginalization, dehumanization. Okay, and even in the midst of all of this, okay. So even in the midst of all of this, I'm gonna just focus here as it relates to missions. They were doing mission work, even in the midst of this oppressive system that is in place. And now I'm going to go. Could you please go to the next slide? So I'm gonna focus here briefly on World Missionary Conference. So even in the midst of all the as I highlighted in those, the timeline that I provided us, African Americans were doing missions, whether it's local or international. Okay, but in 1910 there was a big conference that happened. For those of you who might think of going to do maybe PhD work or get a master's in theology or in missions or intercultural studies, this is actually good lesson for you. I'm giving you like a great rich history here. You ought to know this. Okay, the 1910, this was one of the major conferences that occurred in Edinburgh, Scotland. And it occurred then. The reason why, so Europeans created this, came up with this conference. Over 1,000 people showed up. As you can see, that is the hall. That's where it happened in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And it was mainly run by men, Europeans and Americans. And there were no Catholics, no Africans, no people of Latin, in the Latin America. But I have to also mention though, there were black people in that conference. As I understand this history, there were about 2. Okay, we don't know their names. I have not been able to get their names, but they were there in that conference. But it was overwhelmingly white men and few women. There were women there, but they were white women. Okay, so in the conference, the purpose of this conference was for them to discuss what are we going to do as we're doing all this mission work. Part of it is actually to get reports from missionaries that were in different parts of the world. The other part of it is so that they can encourage each other. So doing missions overseas and doing missions locally. So that was the focus of that gathering. Okay, so mission to the unreachable regions of the world. And then you have missions also locally, so within their localities, how they can do better in preaching the gospel. So this is one of the most important conferences that happened. And the other thing I have to highlight is that in 2010, this conference was organized, but this time around it was organized, I think it's by the evangelical, that Lausanne Society. Don't quote me on that, but it happened in 2010, where they had now people who were not represented during that conference. They were present at the 2010, the anniversary of Edinburgh. Okay, so next, please. So here now I'm going to give you a couple of examples of African Americans who have been doing missions overseas, specifically in Africa, and I hope this gives you an idea that that African Americans have been doing missions. It's just that there are various reasons why you don't hear about that, and part of it is actually, I must mention, it has to do. Part of it is because they are people of enslaved background, and also because of, let's face it, there was some serious racism that was racism within the church. So even documenting their history, their experiences, it was not being prioritized. Okay, it was not being prioritized. So right now, if you look at even the history of missions overseas or American missionaries, you hardly read about African Americans' experience or what African American contributions. In fact, I appreciate what Professor Jacob mentioned to me, that part of the reason why he's doing this, he invited me, is partly for that reason, so that we can have that piece of that history that is usually not being highlighted. Okay, and I appreciate that you're making that effort. I've been to 2 seminaries, Duke Divinity and oh, maybe I shouldn't have been mentioning the name of the schools, but Duke Divinity, at any rate, and Boston College. I got 2 masters, one from Duke and one from Boston College. And some of the things that I had to encourage my professors is that I want to see more. I want to see more Black literature on Black people and people of African descent. Okay. So there's a flaw to some extent in our academia that ought to be amended. So at any rate, this is one example. Is Dr. Rev.William Sheppard and his family, as you can see his picture here. And he was actually, he was the first. So he was the first missionary. He, alongside alongside a white minister, were sent to the Congo to minister. So this was the first time that PCUSA, so that is the Presbyterian Church, okay, the U.S., that wanted to do missionary work in the Congo. And then they sent him alongside his colleague, the minister, and then alongside another minister who is white. And then after after some time, that his white colleague died. Okay, and he stayed until they were, until the home church were able to send more people to help out during this work. And then one of the things that Reverend Sheppard was doing in the Congo, his main purpose was to pretty much break grounds. So he was a church planter. He started planting church, and part of this planting church is by building relationships. So you got there, you have to build relationship with the locals, and in order for you to get anything, you also have to learn the language. So he immersed himself in that community. He had made friends among the Congolese people, and that he was teaching the Bible in his, in various ways. Part of it is also building relationship with people. And during this period, what made Reverend Sheppard work very unique in terms of even history, not just even church history or mission history, but world history and Congolese history and African history, was because he was able to expose what was happening. Remember when I talked about the scramble for Africa in 1884 to 1885 by European powers? Portugal was giving Congo, so which is the Central Africa. He was giving Congo, and he was committing a lot of atrocities that were being ignored. by other Europeans, and even maybe some of the missionaries. They were not really paying attention to what he was doing. He was able to expose Leopold. He shared what he said in his journals, in his newsletters that he would send. He explained what was happening, and he exposed Leopold, and Leopold the second of Belgium, of abuse and crime against humanity, even though during that time, Africa was still colonized. Okay, so he exposed, and he was also sued. There's the part that I did not put that on the slide, but he was sued by the company. So it was fascinating. During this time, he was able to also found a defender an eyewitness who helped him, and he was acquitted. Okay, that's the fast track of the story. So that was the story of Reverend Sheppard. And this, as you can see, his family, we have to acknowledge it, because usually when we talk of missionaries, we talk about the men, but we don't discuss about the women who actually gave them, who helped them, who nurtured them so that they were able to deliver. So as you can see, that's his family, his wife and his two children. And can we go to the next slide, please? And that is King Leopold II. And these are, as you can see, these images are disturbing. Leopold is in the middle, and he was ambitious so much that he wanted to make a lot of money from Congo. Okay, so he didn't care. He just not only dehumanized the people, but also even the land. And Congo, some of you might know, up to today, the legacy of that history is still impacting Congo. Congo is heavily in trouble. Congo is in serious crisis. There's constant war. Part of it has to do with the legacy of Leopold's work or evil work in the Congo. And you can see that's a picture on the left is a father who's watching his kid hands. Because one of the policies that Leopold had was, if you cannot produce more, if you're not, as a person, individuals also and the community had to produce certain amount of rubber. And in order for you to do that, if you don't produce as much as he's asking, the quota, then you get, your hands get chopped off, or your kids. So this father was staring at the hands of his children. And then on the right, you see those Africans and the two men that are holding something. Those are hands. They're holding hands that has been, cut off. All of this is a way of trying to teach them that if you don't listen, then this is what's going to happen to you. So there has been some gruesome things so these are some of the things that Reverend Sheppard, who is an African-American missionary, was able to expose about the Congo. And can we go to the next, please? And so one of the things that Leopold was doing with the money that he was, acquiring from this rubber, because he was making lots of money from the rubber, and the rubber that's being harvested for him. And he was obsessed also with building, grand structures in Belgium. I wouldn't say many, but some of them are still in place up to date. And these are two examples of those structures that he built. One is that on the right is the Avenue Louise, which, as I understand it, he named it after his child, his first daughter. So he commissioned it to be built. And then on the left, you see the Royal Greenhouse of Laeken. And these places are still there in Belgium, and people go there as tourists and pay money. But then this is blood money that built it. So it's an interesting thing that it's an evil that keeps feeding himself in an interesting way. But those are just some of the examples of Leopold's, exploitation of the Congo, and Reverend Sheppard played a role in exposing it to the world. Okay. So the next person I'll go to is Maria Fieri. So she was a missionary to the Congo. Okay. So what's interesting about this story is that her other name is, that Congolese gave her is Mama wa Maputo. That is mother from far away. The interesting thing about her story, she was enslaved. She was taking care of a white woman's children, and then she learned to read, from her, from her mistress. And then she gained her freedom. So she was able to go to college. And while she was in college, she heard from Reverend Sheppard about the Congo. He came back trying to recruit more missionaries to go back to the Congo and help him do, the work that he was doing. She heard him when he was speaking about this. She was inspired. She went to the mission board, which is the PC, Presbyterian Church again, and they refused her. They said that she couldn't go. They didn't give her the permission to go. So she applied again. And this time around, they didn't fund her. She decided that she was going to do it, she's going to pay her way. So she sold her house, sold her properties. I think she sold her house for $100, which is, I'm sure, a lot of money from then. So, and then took off to the Congo. She went there at the age of 56, 57, went there and started this work of participating in building, in helping the community to know Christ this way. And then she started a children's young girls called Young Girls Organization or house where she was teaching these young girls. It's called the Pantops Home for Girls. And she did that in 1915. So you remember when I talked about the Edinburgh, even to situate this in history, in 1910, there was a conference, right? She founded this house in 1915, so not long after that conference. But then African Americans have been doing mission way before that. But, not many of them were present at the conference. And also, so she was a teacher also, and she was very loved. She came back to the United States in her 70s because of this. She was pretty much forced to retire. And then she stayed, she went back to her place, she was in Alabama and continued doing work. So this is now local missions. So she did missions work overseas and came back and did local missions where she again continued to teach, and she lived up to 99. So she died at the age of 99. Yeah. So that's an incredible story. Could we go to the next slide, please? And this is the children of Pantops home. And I have to acknowledge, though, real quick, for the purposes of copyright, these pictures, they do not belong to me. I got them from reliable sources. Some of them, I think they're from the PC USA website, if I remember, but they're not my property. But for the purposes of education, that's why I'm sharing them. Okay, could we go to the next slide, please? Because I don't know, how long do we have, Prof?
Sorry about that. We can go until 3:15 or even 3:30, and then do some questions if you'd like. Okay.
All right. I'll add. There's just a few more slides, and then we'll end, because I'm interested in in also having conversation with the students. Great. So the other example I'm going to give you now is from West Africa. So this is Ethel Johnson. She's a United Methodist. The history not too far though, because this is not 18th. This is not the 20th century. But she started. But she has an incredible. I could have used. There's so many examples of African American missionaries, but I just wanted to also give you an example, a recent example. Okay, so this is she went to Africa in 1975, but she was doing a lot of. Her resume is impressive. She was doing not only within the church, but outside the church here in the United States. And then she went over to Nigeria, to Sierra Leone, Liberia, Zimbabwe. But the first time she went to Africa was in 1975. And she should be 98 years old now. Okay. And she helped. One of the things that's special about her is because I happened to know her when I was a little girl. So you can imagine, she saw me when I was a little girl, and she helped the United Methodist Church in Nigeria to become a denomination. So I remember seeing, she even lived right next door to us. She was responsible. She was helping our newly appointed bishop in pretty much putting things in place so that the denomination can function, well. She was also a teacher. Pardon me, I shouldn't use that. She's still with us. She's a teacher. She taught, catechism. She taught administrative, how to put things, in order administratively. But she was also a teacher, not only in Nigeria, but she was a teacher at Africa University. So she was there teaching. She has a degree in sociology, I believe, and psychology. So she put that into work, and she incorporates that even in as she does doing her ministry. So she's well known in Africa, especially at Africa University, which is a university founded by the United Methodist Church. And she advocates for students. So when students need money or funding, she would make sure that she goes above and beyond to help them get those scholarship. In fact, as you can see on the slide, there's now the Ohio Methodist Theological School in Ohio has a funding scholarship in her honor. So she also the founder of Black Methodist for Church Renewal. So this group, it's over 5,000 members, and one of the things is so it's overseas. So they have members overseas in Africa and here in the United States. And so she's also an expert in diversity. When the United Methodist Church needs, I know you hear these days a lot about diversity experts, but Ms.Ethel Johnson has been doing this for decades. Okay, so this is so doing missions. She's doing mission overseas and also here in the United States. And I like what she said. That she says, through my role as educator, I've been able to celebrate my call, my Blackness, my singleness, and my lay status. So she was not a reverend or anything, but she was committed. The incredible work that she's been doing to reach the world globally. And can we go to the next slide, please? And the next slide is, so this is the bishop who she helped, Bishop Dabale on the left, and his wife is on the right. And he was the first bishop of the United Methodist Church in Nigeria. And she helped him, doing this, as I mentioned earlier, helped him form the organization into a solid organization that's now, by the time Bishop Dabale died in 2010, they had over 500,000 people in that denomination within the period of 10 years. So there was incredible work that was being done. And on the right is just an announcement of Bishop Dabale's demise. And next to him is Bishop Huey, which was the president of the Council of Bishops at the time when he died. And then now the last example I'll give you, it's this is Charlotte Makgomo Mazeke. Okay, so Charlotte is actually South African. You ask me, what does this have to do with African American missionaries? Actually, it has a lot to do with African American missionaries, because the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is the AME church that was founded by African Americans, discovered Charlotte. And so Charlotte was a singer, was singing with a group choir. They came to the United States. They were, traveling, and then they ended up in the United States. They got stranded because their manager abandoned them. So they got stranded, and then the AME church got involved. They invited them, helped them. And then Charlotte also ended up, alongside her colleague, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME, decided that they're going to fund them. They're going to help them to, because they, discovered the brilliant people. And Charlotte was one of the prominent member of that choir and became later, a big figure. They educated at a historically Black college, which is an HBCU in Ohio, Wilberforce University, which is still standing today, the university. And they do, part of it is that the bishop at the time, Bishop Payne, was doing missionary work in South Africa. So when he heard of this, promising young lady, he decided that they're going to do, it's part of their mission work is to, to also build, to build not only scholars but people, in their own context. So at any rate, they provided them with scholarship. They came to the United States, started going to school there, graduated, and Charlotte went back to South Africa. And at the same time, Charlotte told one of her relatives, who was a minister, her uncle, in fact, and her uncle was able to collaborate with the AME Church to start their own branch of AME Church in South Africa. So, and then Charlotte, of course, became famous in South Africa. She was a singer, religious, she's very religious. She was not a minister, but she was using her religious identity, her religious values or Christian values. And her traditional values, to advocate human rights advocacy she was doing. But alongside doing that, actually, she was also more highlighting the struggles of women. So it's part of her mission or her service. She lived her life really to serve others, because even she had health issues, and she was a breadwinner because her husband was often getting sick. So she was taking care of a sick husband while she was living in poverty and advocating for people, as opposed to sitting back and say, oh, feel sorry for herself. This is not to suggest that people should not take care of themselves, but I'm just giving this example. She was advocating for the least of these, as the Bible tells us. And she was also, actually, I forgot to mention, she was also being taught by W.E.B. Du Bois, the famous philosopher, who eventually, he also moved to Africa, where he died in Ghana, West Africa. So the AME Church was doing as a denomination. So this example that I'm giving you is even a denominational example of African Americans doing missions overseas and investing, in the development of others. And Mama Charlotte ended up becoming, she was actually, as you can see on the slide, the first South African woman to earn a bachelor's degree. Yeah. And a hospital is named after her right now in South Africa. And some argued that she's the mother of South African liberation struggle, arguably, because I know others would say Winnie Mandela, but these are just examples of how African Americans have participated in missionary work overseas. Okay. And thank you for your time, and I hope we can have a fruitful discussion. Igbeso, in my language, we say Igbeso. It's finished. Thank you for your time and for inviting me, Prof. Jacob.
Yes, that was a wonderful presentation and such a rich history of African American missions from the States and from other countries as well. It is so inspirational, and these stories need to be told. And so I know that many of our students have prepared some questions for you, and maybe some came up during the presentation. So if we can maybe now just have a discussion here, and then I would love to get your questions answered, and just have a good time talking with Yoknyam about some of her presentation and this important, rich history.
Just out of curiosity, for missions in Africa, how did they get over the hurdles during the time of apartheid?
Yeah, good question. Based on what I know, even apartheid in South Africa and other places, part of it is because they were, because they were Black. And I think, at least on what what I've been reading, there's this element of blending in too with the locals. So it's not as obvious. So they join, with the liberation struggle. And especially, actually, you see the AME, for example, the AME church, it's race conscious. In fact, that's why the AME church was founded, because so after they have they left the Methodist church, right? They decided to form their own denomination, based on the fact that they want to, highlight their racial, their theological ideas that's, based on their experiences. And so I would say that they were able to blend in with the locals. So because during this period in the early, 18th century, so that would be 1800s, 19th century. So during this period, Africa was still going through colonialism. African liberation or African independence started in the 60s. In fact, the earliest was 1958, I think, or 57, which is Ghana. Okay. So yes, I would say that they were able to blend in. There are times where actually, because people of African descent, I will be more specific, because African Americans have been in the United States for a while, there is also some disconnect, because for them is that some of them see it as this is an opportunity to to save this backwards Africans. So they, in a way, they're reproducing racist colonial ideas about the continent and the people on the continent.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's that element of that too, but there's also an element of we're going to home to, to preach the gospel to the people.
Good. Somebody else have a question?
Yeah, I got a question. What do you think what was the reputation of the Methodist Church during that time period? How did the culture view the Methodist Church?
Broad. So where though? Is it view the Methodist Church in South Africa?
Was it sort of the church at the time, was it sort of entrenched in tradition, or what was the reputation of the church, specifically Methodist?
Yeah, so the Methodist Church had, so let me give you an example. You see, Zimbabwe, there were missionaries, Methodist missionaries in Zimbabwe. They started, the denomination, but part of it is there was some serious issues of how, maybe not necessarily with African Americans, but in general with Western missionaries, of seeing Africa as this backwards place. Mm. So there were so many colonial ideas that were being passed down. That were being, for example, African women traditionally in Zimbabwe, the Shona women dress very elegantly, colorful ways, the way they put on, the traditional makeup and, even talk in public spaces. When missionaries came, they said that those things were disgusting, that they were nasty, especially the makeup, the things they did with themselves. And then they were also said that the women were so too talkative, so they need to be tamed, in a godly way. So there were Eurocentric, more Victorian values that were being passed down by the missionaries. Mm. So I would say that the missionaries, and also out of that, came the African independent churches. So to answer directly to your question, I think there was a resistance to that way of doing mission, because you are forcing your values on the people, and the people who have been living freely didn't like it, so they moved away. So hence the reason why these days you see African independent churches, there are many of them actually in Southern Africa, and that is because they came out of that tradition. And I can say for a fact, for example, Gutara Jehovah, it's a church that started by a woman that left the Methodist Church because she felt oppressed. So she left the Methodist Church and started her own denomination, which is Gutara Jehovah, which means the city of God. Macheza, that's her name. She started the church on her own and was incorporating indigenous ideas in her ministry. So she started also using, like, the healing ministry was very big, because within the traditional religion, there is this emphasis on healing. And that's one of the things that she brought to the Christian practice and ministry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
That's really awesome. I'm curious, the healing ministry, like, how did that come about? Because I've heard about that before, and how that was like a big part of that ministry back then. So I'm curious, like, specifically healing, was that like just prevalent, or was there just a lot of healings? Like, that's cool, but I'm curious.
Yeah. So you see, the healing ministry is actually up to date. That's one of the reasons why one would argue why Pentecostalism is massive on the continent of Africa. And I would say globally, but more specifically on the continent of Africa, Pentecostalism, because they emphasize, they learn this. They use use Bible verses, okay? They put references from the Bible about healing to back up the reason why they do what they do. But healing ministry is massive on the continent, and many women participate in this. Why? Because women have carried a lot of burden, so be it spiritual healing or physical healing or healing, for example, in the example I gave about Gutara Jehovah, the healing, barren women, go there to seek healing because they want to, have children, since having children in that context is important to them. So it's still even up to date. It's popular.
Mm. Yoknyam, you bring up a lot of some of the mistakes in missions past, and I'm really glad for that. There are some today of many ethnicities, African Americans and Caucasians I know of also, that are hesitant to be involved in missions because of the mistakes of the past. So I'm wondering, can you just maybe speak to how would you talk to somebody who maybe is hesitant to be involved in missions in any way due to some of these horrific occurrences?
Right. Great question. By the way, all the other questions were great. But so I think that one thing one ought to do to start with is decolonizing. Okay. One ought to be willing to, what I mean by that, part of education that decolonizes. So you have to be willing to learn the hard truth. It's tough. There's some atrocities that were committed or ignored by missionaries, Christian missionaries. It's breathtaking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to learn, have a posture, because as you all know, that the epicenter of Christianity has shifted to the global south. So we're talking about places that they know, Asia, Latin America, Africa. Okay. So in fact, I think the posture of learning would help. Like this time around, we're going at learners. Now, part of the problem is this article that's been written about missions, or even education, okay, theological education. To some extent, the West actually is still in charge, because the documents that we have are still Eurocentric and all that. So even people in the global South are reading those documents, even in their training as theologians. So it was even the people in the place, the colonized space, they are still studying colonized subjects. And to some extent, they are reproducing it too. So I think it's giving an opportunity, right, for a Westerner who has studied, and especially in a decolonizing setting, to go back to that place and said, I'm here to learn this time around. I'm here to learn. And then you maybe the Westerner could also learn, could also maybe participate in decolonizing others too. Part of the way we're wrong, I'm here to learn, but then maybe they will try to impose Eurocentric ideas. The Westerner could say, actually, we were wrong.
Yeah.
I think that would help in having a healthy dream missionary. So yes, you go there. So you have to learn. The point I'm making is that one has to also the posture of learning, and also being willing is going to be very tough. Some of us have read this thing. For me, I'm comfortable speaking, about this at this point because I've been studying for a very long time. Yeah. So I've learned to cope with it. Okay, there's some people who would, hear this the first time. They will come up with. For some of them, it will be hard. It will be triggering. It will be triggering, and they will see it. So some would see it as though you're attacking Christianity. But really, if you study this stuff, it's even the theology that we have. There's so many things that mission theology that's problematic that ought to be reviewed.
Yeah, really good. We've had a few students write into the chat here, and questions are still coming in. So one of the more popular questions here that several students are asking is, why do you believe is the main reason there are so few African-American missionaries sent from the USA?
Yeah. Part of it, at least from maybe the mother churches, I think part of it is, I think it boils down to racism. Because if you remember when I talked of Maria Fieri, she was not sponsored. She took care of her bills, but she was there under the PCA, the Presbyterian. Okay, so part of it is racism. The other part of it is there's a subset of African Americans who do not participate in mission overseas because of the conditions. Remember when I gave you the timeline? of the different events, be it Jim Crow laws, be it the civil rights movement, the Tilden-Hayes Compromise, etc., etc. So there's layers of problems that they have. As a result, some don't get involved. Up to today, even the legacy is still present, that some will rather try to solve problems that is very immediate, as opposed to going overseas. So those are some of the reasons why. But I noticed recently there's also a subset of Black evangelicals that are making efforts to go overseas. And some of them, I think, actually do not necessarily know of the history of missions overseas, but then part of it is maybe they get their education, even in a setting where they did not learn about it. Frankly, I know of this because I read a lot, and I'm also interested in African-American story. I've been here, I'm Black, I've been from Nigeria actually originally, but part of it is I want to know about the history of people who are enslaved here, of my ancestors that were enslaved here. So that's actually part of it as I study, because part of my major area of expertise is actually on gender and African. So in fact, briefly, my research looks at African women, how they navigate their identity within their church and among their ethnic group. And I look at women of Northern Nigeria, United Methodist Church in Northern Nigeria, and also I compare with Ethiopia, early Christianity in Ethiopia. So, but along that, this research is also part, because also missions is part of my areas of expertise. And I think it will be a disservice to me and anybody else to not study this if they're trying to have a good grasp of missions in North America.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Really good. Another one of our students writes, what's one of your favorite African-American missionaries and how have they inspired you?
Yeah, good question. There's many of them, but maybe actually the one that I appreciate the most is Dr. Sheppard, Reverend Dr. Sheppard story, William Sheppard with the Congo.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why is because Congo is still a troubled place. So he inspired me when I read about him. There's somebody else actually. His name is George Washington or something along those lines. There are others too. He's not the only one that raised this alarm, but I think the person was a journalist, an African-American as well. But Reverend Sheppard, because he inspired because of his willingness to take risk and part of it, he was doing that for the gospel, really.
Yeah.
And the other part of it, I would assume that he was doing that because they're Africans like him. Even though he's a person of African descent. And so for me, it's about, I don't see the gospel as something that's just personal to me. I may not talk a lot about it. I mean, when I was, learning, finding my space within the Christian experience, I used to be more vocal, but the older I get, I'm more doing than vocal. And I think that is, speaking up. I call myself a scholar advocate or scholar activist. And part of it is because of these sort of stories, because I see that you can use Christianity as a tool to revolutionize a place. And there are many other stories actually of women too, who impact, who inspired me.
That's great. Are there other students that might have a question you can ask Yoknyam?
Yeah, I was wondering if where are you seeing the biggest breakthrough to go or passion to go or uptick in African American sending? Like maybe it's a certain age group or a certain region or a certain church.
If I see a massive interest in missions overseas.
Yeah. So is there a big breakthrough in African American sending? And do you know if there's a certain if there's a certain group of people that are wanting to go more recently, or I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yeah, I do know. I mentioned earlier, the name. I even spoke last year with the group. There's an evangelical group that do missions, that do missionary work overseas. And there's also, I know a few people that are involved in, their church, through their church, that, that do missionary work, in Africa and other places. And I have to highlight this though, pardon me. I have to highlight this though. African Americans were not doing missionary work just in Africa. I just focus in Africa. They were doing missionary work in India, in Latin America. In fact, I was reading one story of a missionary, but this particular missionary was a servant to a missionary. Yes. So They were going as missionaries, but they were servants to white missionaries to, I think, Hawaii. So they were everywhere. They were doing missionary works all over the place. The examples I gave you, these are just narrow for the purposes of this class and time. I just gave you these few examples, but they were doing so historically. And then now I do know that there are African Americans that, individuals, that are interested in doing missions. But then some of them, to some extent, I have to acknowledge that they too need to know that history. They need to know their history. And the other part of it, they also have to learn to decolonize. Yeah. What I mean by that is that you're not going there to teach those people. You're going there to learn as well. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I know too that the NAMAC, or National African American Missions Council, is also helping to mobilize more African Americans and to educate the African American church specifically on their rich heritage in mission sending. And so Pastor Adrian Reeves, who heads up NAMAC, and I have had several conversations about his work and what we can do to mobilize more African Americans to the nation. So wonderful, great insights today. We have time for maybe one more question from a student.
What sparked your interest in missions?
Good question. Because, and all the other, I have to acknowledge, all the other questions were good, just so you know. I grew up actually in the church in Nigeria. My parents, I did not tell you that, but those were my parents in the picture that I showed you.
Wow.
And I grew up in the church. My father was a farmer. He was a businessman doing a bunch of different businesses, but he was also, a minister. And I noticed how he was transforming a region that's been shut out of Nigeria. So this northern region that has been ignored by the government, there was so many problems there. So, poor schools, poor hospitals, etc., etc. The church my parents were able to mobilize close to 500,000 people within a period of 10 years. Wow. Because of their dedication to that region. We are from that region, but still, they could have easily done something else with their lives because others were doing it. He got education, my father, and went back to Nigeria and started doing this work with the help of so many other people. He was not just by himself, but, he was a leader. And so that growing up, I had that desire. I wanted to help people. Okay. So they built hospitals, schools, vacational centers. Sometimes my parents would give their last money to pay somebody's school fees. And I felt that, there are times, frankly, that I thought that we're being ignored, we're being neglected. But in fact, a quick example to this, when I was a kid, my parents, would use their money for everybody else. One time, even cooking, we didn't have lotion because we have to grease our body. Black folks, we grease our bodies every day after we shower. We didn't have oil, so I used cooking oil, which is we use peanut oil for frying stuff. I used that to grease my body because we didn't have money at the time to buy that. So but then my parents would just pour in money and the resources. People come to our house unannounced. We feed them. My mother would feed them. Buy people. So that all of that for me was inspiring to me because I learned about institution building, and I also learned about how the gospel is not just words. In fact, my parents often say when I was growing up to us that the Bible, that you are the Bible that the people are reading. you, the person at the Bible, you, the person is the, you are the Bible that people are reading. So meaning the way you live your life is the gospel. So growing up in that setting inspired me to study missions, to study religion, to study women's experiences, etc.
Wow. So not only is there such a rich heritage of African-American mission sending from all around the world, but your own family has such a rich heritage and very inspirational today. Thank you so much for being honest with us and sharing with us about some of the atrocities that have occurred so that we can make sure that we never repeat these evils. Thank you for just inspiring us and sharing with us all that you've learned in your research with your master's degrees and your PhD studies there at Fuller. This has been incredibly enriching and no doubt a class that we'll be thinking on and talking about for quite some time. So Yoknyam, we really appreciate you and all of your hard work and dedication to missions and to bring up these issues with us today. Thanks again, everybody. Yoknyam, God bless you and your ministry.
Thank you. Take care of yourselves.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.